Okay, so moving on now, our next speaker is Marla Shaivitz from Johns Hopkins University, who will be presenting a critical look at the New Deal era project, its value and usefulness in the 21st century, and how to get started with it as a resource.
Thank you for that introduction, and good morning, everyone. My name is Marla Shaivitz. I'm a recent MLA grad from Johns Hopkins University. I also work at Hopkins in the School of Public Health in the Center for Communication Programs as Director of Digital Strategy. And this interest in digital is what drew me to a course on digital humanities. Today, I'm presenting my work from that course, which I took in the fall of 2021, a course designed to familiarize students with digital encoding tools, web platforms, assorted search engines, and other methodologies directly relevant to a wide range of research agendas in the liberal arts. My project, titled The Federal Writers Project, a critical look at the New Deal era project, its value and usefulness in the 21st century, and how it gets started with it as a resource, is what I'm presenting today. This project is my capstone for the course, where the assignment was to work with a digital humanities tool of your choosing to analyze a text or data set or create a digital edition or exhibition. I decided to use the Federal Writers Project as the data set on the ArcGIS platform and create a guide for researchers who are getting started with using the archive. The original archive is located at the Library of Congress, and the Federal Writers Project was part of the Works Progress Administration, a New Deal program designed to get Americans back to work during the Depression. I'll share a link at the end of my presentation in the chat to the full project, but I'm going to use slides to point out key elements to show interactivity. Along with this tour through the project, I'll also detail my rationale, methodology, and findings. My process started by synthesizing the background research I had gathered. This itself is a very large archive, so I needed to narrow down the topic areas. The challenge with this subject matter is that the Federal Writers Project is already well organized at the Library of Congress. What is not in that archive, however, are the critiques, which anyone using the archive to create original scholarship really needs to know before using these works as is. This is the basis for my project. After I introduced the different topic areas, I added a further research section, which includes my thoughts on other ways to use this material. And after I finalized the sections, which I'll show you in this presentation, I was ready to create the digital version. Overall, this project gave me a taste of the decision-making involved in a large-scale digital humanities project. It also left me hopeful of the possibilities of digital humanities. One being, this work isn't final, I can always update it. I've organized my work into sections, and in this presentation, I'll give you a brief overview. The Federal Writers Project is a multimedia archive. Not only are there written accounts of American life at the time, there are photos and audio recordings, which I've incorporated into my guide. My text is less formal, as it is a web-based guide as opposed to the style of an academic paper. In the introduction, I indicate how the archive is full of surprises, taking readers and researchers on a bit of a wild ride. So if they were expecting an objective chronicle of the lives of 1930s Americans, this is not that. The writers that were employed by the Federal Writers Project were of, let's say, various abilities, and the Federal Writers Project offered minimal training. Zora Neale Hurston and Richard Wright were employed. They and roughly 40 others were established authors or on their way to it. They were the exception. The other 6,000, well, the criticism of the Federal Writers Project came quickly. In the 1930s, there was a joke that claimed the Federal Writers Project hired more ex-plumbers than ex-writers. One of my initial ideas for this project was to analyze individual stories, and that quickly became overwhelming. However, I read several of them, and while some are good, some are pretty goofy, for lack of a better term. They're full of 1930s slang, and there are derogatory terms in these narratives that would make modern readers bristle. I mentioned that the contributors to the Federal Writers Project not only wrote narratives, but contributed photographs and audio files. I included an audio file of the contributor Zora Neale Hurston performing a song from the Bahamas. I'm not going to play it, but listen if you have time, and you'll hear the interviewer begin by saying, "What kind of a song is this, Zora?" And Zora Neale Hurston will answer in words and then sing the melody. Okay, these bullets that you see here are the next sections of my project. The first one, politics. The Federal Writers Project was a product of the FDR administration, and it was a target for conservatives at the time. The political element in the criticism cannot be ignored, and the politics of the writers come through in their work as well. Now, this is an archive of the everyman. Most of the archive is comprised of stories of everyday people telling stories of their day-to-day, remember, with varying quality. Records from historians who study the archive, they seem to can't help themselves by inserting humor. Critics noted that prominent members of society to the dregs of society, as they called them, were all interviewed. I've included the actual quotes in my project, and the sarcasm is biting and downright funny. The files of the Federal Writers Project are arranged in the following series: Administrative File, American Guide File, Folklore Project, Social Ethnic Studies, Special Studies and Projects, Negro Studies Project, Slave Narrative Project, which we're going to talk about, Miscellaneous Records, Miscellaneous Printed Matter. For those getting started with this material, the Library of Congress website provides a brief history and introduction to each section, and those are linked in my project. There are additional digital archives on materials within the Federal Writers Project. Yet where my archive becomes unique is that I demonstrate the use of digital tools with a specific story, a slave narrative. And before I demonstrate that, let's talk about the utility of the slave narratives and how they might be misleading. The official title of that collection is Born in Slavery, Slave Narratives from the Federal Writers Project, 1936 to 1938. And it contains interviews with more than 2,300 people who were enslaved. Before delving into these first-person accounts, a few facts should be told. Remember the issue of quality and lack of guidance for the writers? This was where that really comes back to tarnish the historical record. Thomas F. Soaps wrote in 1978, the Federal Writers Project Slave Interviews, Useful Data, or Misleading Source of the practices that make these narratives in a way suspect. The writers were given instructions to, quote, avoid excessive editorializing, and displays of the editor's creative writing prowess were firmly discouraged. Yet, random inspection of the published transcripts indicates, however, these instructions were not always followed. There are other aspects of these narratives for the reader to keep in mind. For one, the formerly enslaved people were elderly at the time of the interviews, as they were children or teens during emancipation. These were often 70-year-old memories or older being recalled. Another concern that this wasn't a random sampling of formerly enslaved people. They were either asked or volunteered their stories. And also there is some question to the honesty of the narrative, because remember, this is the Jim Crow South. Soaps wrote, Blacks in the South in the 1930s necessarily concealed their feelings toward whites, and white interviewers could not expect to receive full and truthful answers to their questions. Problematic as they might be, there's value for sure to modern day scholarship and literary pursuits. Colson Whitehead used the slave narratives as inspiration for his book, The Underground Railroad. Eugene Genovese had made extensive use of these sources in Roll, Jordan, Roll, The World That Slaves Made. Examining these documents provides academic, professional, and amateur historians with source material for additional scholarship. An example can be found in this, the Maryland Slave Narrative Collection, and the story told by a man named Thomas Foote. The narrative is titled Thomas Foote's Story, A Free Negro, and in it, Foote recounts an intriguing tale of his mother and her escape from white captors who believed she was harboring a fugitive slave. She wasn't, according to the account by her son. I found this story while browsing through the slave narratives. I searched for Maryland and began reading through this, and this is where I came across Thomas Foote's account and was intrigued by the detailed description of so many places near my home in Maryland. The narrative is so rich in description of location, mapping it was a natural choice. Here is a visual representation of Foote's story, an example of how scholars can interact digitally with the material for digital humanities projects. What intrigued me about Thomas Foote's account was the detailed description of so many places near my house just north of Baltimore. What led me to explore ArcGIS and led to the outline, this is what led me to explore ArcGIS as a platform and the outline of the story map. Story maps are an ArcGIS format for telling a web-based story, incorporating mapping and text and multiple and multimedia elements. I also made an attempt at topic modeling on the Maryland slave narratives. And while it didn't provide me with material for this assignment, I do think there is value in this type of text exploration, which I'll explain a little bit in the further research section. My rationale for choosing ArcGIS story maps to present at Getting Started to the Federal Writers Project archive was its built-in functionality. I knew I wanted to center the piece around a map to provide the reader an example of original materials beyond written words that could be produced from the Federal Writers Project archive. So let's look at the foothouse. Okay. Thomas introduces the reader to Eliza and Thomas, his mother and father, who had a large family who lived on, as you see here, a small farm 1 mile east of Cockeysville, 15 miles north of Baltimore City on the NCR. The NCR is the North Central Railroad, which is currently a park and a bike path. You can see the points mentioned in the story are on the map, and you can click on these as well in the archive. I'm not going to read through all of the points, but just to mention that the pin on the map is highlighted when a point on the journey is selected. Here, Thomas mentions his mother, Eliza, a free woman, daughter of a free man. She worked for a local homeopathic doctor, Dr. Enzer of Cockeysville. Dr. Enzer's wife taught Eliza how to read, and she was a doctor woman to free people and slaves. The image that you see here is the Ridgely Mansion and property, which contains the slave quarters Thomas refers to in the statement he gave to the interviewer. Quote, "In gaining practical experience and knowledge of different herbs and roots that Dr. Enzer used in the compounding of his medicine, used them for commercial purposes, for herself, among the slaves and free colored people of Baltimore County, especially the Merrimans, the Ridgeleys, Roberts, Cockeys, and Mayfields." Thomas recalls a story of when his mother tended to a slave who was seen leaving her house and picked up by local whites who were suspicious as they believed local slaves were conspiring to run away. The slave was found with roots in his pocket that Eliza gave him, and suspicions turned on her. Foote tells the interviewer that she was immediately accused of voodooism by the whites of Cockeysville. She was taken to the Towson jail, there confined and grilled by the sheriff of Baltimore County. Surmising, but not knowing where the man might have run off to, she tells her captors he may be in Deer Creek. Thomas recounts her thinking that led to this locale, and by chance, she was right. Believing she was part of the conspiracy, Thomas recounted, "Mother was ordered to leave Baltimore County or to be sold into slavery. She went to York, Pennsylvania, where she stayed until 1865, when she returned to her home in Cockeysville, where a great many of her descendants live now on a hill that slopes west to Cockeysville Station and is known as Foote's Hill by both white and colored people of Baltimore County today. Even in 2023, it's still known as Foote's Hill." Corroborating this is the Maryland Historical Society, who indicate Foote's Hill is a small historical African-American enclave on Powers Avenue in Cockeysville, anchored by the Basel American Methodist Episcopal Church, and its cemetery on Sherwood Road. Okay, the black and white photo is the church from the Maryland Historical Society archive, and this new photo is from an article from the Baltimore Sun just last year. My digital guide wraps up with suggestions for digital humanities scholars to consider. The first, topic modeling. The Library of Congress has text versions of each written document. This is material for topic modeling and textual analysis. In my close reading, the topic of voodoo came up quite often, and it's mentioned in Thomas Foote's story as well. This is an example of potential area of research, and Lexos and Voyant are tools to consider for this. For textual analysis, one criticism of the archive is that the writers inserted their own viewpoints and interpretation on the vernacular in the slave narratives. One area of exploration would be to analyze via text analysis if there are patterns in a writer's language, to see if you can tell the writer's word patterns, if they are changing the words of the interviewee into their own. This dendrogram that you see here is an example of tracing authorship through text analysis of what you can do. And this is an example of somebody that did this with the Federalist Papers to determine who the authors were, and then digital collection. A digital collection of works inspired or derived from the Federal Writers Project could be created, including, Whitehead's Underground Railroad and Genovese's Roll, Jordan, Roll, and films such as the HBO documentary Unchained Memories, Readings from the Slave Narratives. And then finally, mapping. The story map is but one example of mapping work that could be created from this archive. Historian Daniel Fox noted that descriptions of Southern cities and towns are among the best in the entire series, and drawings and maps are used more creatively than in most of the guides. So recreating these in ArcGIS or other mapping software may glean new insights into the geography of the South at the time. So I will paste my link into the chat and thank everyone for the opportunity to present today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marla. We have 1 minute if someone has a quick question for Marla on her presentation. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, quickly, Josue.
Hi Marla. I like how GIS has implications for social geography, for physical geography, for health. It's just a very rich area. Thank you for sharing your presentation.